Hello, if you're tuning in here, it is Friday. This is the Morning Brushback podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan Blewett, and I'm here with Bobby Stevens. Bobby, how you doing?
Daniel.
And we have an awesome guest here today. Injury expert Will Carroll is on the show. Will, thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Dan. It's been a while since I've seen you guys.
Yeah. So for those of you out here, Will is a celebrated sports writer. He's really your go-to guy especially if you're in the fantasy sports world now, or if you bet on sports at all, or if you just want to stay up to date with your team and you just like with Chris Sale, like all these breaking news with injuries, and obviously it's unfortunately a constant flow, especially in baseball. But for all the best up-to-date information, Will's a really, really good resource on the web. So if you don't follow him on Twitter, he's at Injury Expert, and he has an awesome newsletter, which we'll put in the show notes. So if you're interested in staying up to date with injury updates, Will's been doing this for a long, long time. So we appreciate his expertise, and you're a baseball guy too.
Yeah. I've been a baseball guy my whole life, and it's amazing. You get my age, you start looking back on things and just how much it's gone. And then this year, prior to the whole coronavirus thing, I was actually back in uniform, which was kind of a shock to the system and to my mirror.
Yeah. So how did your experience with UIndy go? So you were with the University of Indianapolis, which is they're a really strong Division II. How did that go? Tell me about it.
It was a really interesting experience. I learned a lot on a lot of sides. The coaches there, already Trevor Ford, Landon Hutchinson was the pitching coach, is the pitching coach. Let me in and kind of just let me toy around. I tried not to mess up the talent that they had, which was a lot. We had 3 starting pitchers that were, all 88 to 90, 2 lefties. One of our lefties, Corey Bates, had a 15 strikeout game that I talked about in my last. By the way, 15 in 7. He went all 7. They let me experiment. We used all sorts of technology. We had, Rapsodo, Modus, video overlays, high-speed cameras, you name it. We pretty much had that technology. Driver and track behind us. So tons of stuff that we were using, and a lot of talent. We went 12-3 before the season was postponed / canceled, and we got to do a lot of things.
So how did your team? I mean, I assume every team took it pretty hard and pretty much the same way. But I mean, how did you feel personally being in the mix with all that? I mean, this is your first season back. You guys were crushing it and really hitting your stride. And then, I mean, what's that like? How was breaking the mood to everybody?
It was really strange because it happened so fast. We were driving back from we had played Purdue Northwest and split a doubleheader in the cold rain, and as we're driving back on the bus, it's about a 2.5 hour ride, and we had stopped at Portillo's for dinner. And by the time we got back on the bus, the world was starting to change. The whole Rudy Gobert thing happened. Tom Hanks announced that he had it, and you could just see everybody on their phones, on Twitter, put the presidential address up on the TVs on the vans. And it was really intriguing because none of these kids had lived through anything like that. None of us have. But there was nothing. I can remember 9/11 clearly. I can remember the Challenger explosion, which is probably beyond you guys' age. It's one of those things where you felt everything was changing so fast, and it was going to be one of those moments. But it went way beyond that. It went from we're playing baseball on Wednesday, the season's gone on Saturday, and it's just heartbreaking for the kids, especially the ones that had a real shot at being drafted this year.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to ask you as a college coach. How did you feel about how quickly everything just got wiped away? I mean, I know it's a difficult situation, like you said. There's no blueprint to what's happening right now, but I think they came out really, really quickly with a pretty set in stone decision.
Yeah, it sure felt that way at the time, and I can look at it now and say, oh yeah, that was the right decision because of all that's happened afterwards.
Yeah.
At the time, it was rough because you're like, what? You're doing it now? Can't you just postpone a couple weeks of games?
Yeah.
And there's a ton of stuff. I'm never going to praise the NCAA, but it feels like they handled it right. Looking back on it, as much as I hated that it happened and that year is essentially going to vanish from history. Yeah, I can't see any other way to have done it. There's still some people out there. I have a friend who has a son, really good catching prospect out east in New Jersey, and they haven't canceled the season yet. So everybody's in this weird sort of holding pattern.
Wait, he's at college or where's that
high
kid?
school.
Oh, got high school. Really?
Yeah, I don't want to give too much away because I'm recruiting that kid.
Yeah, fair enough.
And so yeah, super catching prospect. I feel bad for them because what do? Obviously, you got to stay in shape. You got to try to keep everything going. We were trying to figure out how are we going to keep our arms going, and you really can't even play catch, let alone do a good workout, which is one of my major worries for MLB. But I hated it, but I see now that all those quick decisions were probably the right ones. Doing it in a kind of rolling way, saying, okay, 2 weeks are canceled, 2 weeks are canceled, that'd be like stabbing you multiple times.
Yeah. And you wonder, because at the time, the Ivy League was the first ones to shut it down. And you're like, really? And then after, for me, like half the day, I'm like, uh-oh, this is going to be it for everybody. If one of the most academically respected conferences has shut it down, this is going to happen quick. And you wonder if they didn't do that, if they didn't pull the trigger, how much, maybe everyone was would keep going a little bit longer. I think starting with a good example, and I mean, say that's good leadership from the Ivy League, but
absolutely,
they were decisive. They were decisive.
Yeah, and I think we saw it with the NCAA tournament where they were kind of talking about some things they wanted to do. They had this nuclear option that they were going to bring all the teams to one site, and it sort of makes sense in your head. But when teams like Duke and Kansas started saying, you know what, I don't think we want to travel anywhere, you realize, this isn't going to work. And again, taking this to Major League Baseball, I wonder whether they're going to be able to pull this off because we have a team in Canada, and Canada seems to be handling this like adults. And we'll have to see where it goes. But you can't do it with 29 teams. Yeah.
This is true. Well, I'm gonna give you some background information. So if you're gonna start criticizing the way things have been handled with the Trump administration, which I'm very critical, I think objectively it's pretty easy to say they acted slowly. Bobby's gonna leap through the camera and fight you.
Okay.
Bobby's a conspiracy theorist, and he will whitewash anything to make Mr. Trump look exceptional. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but
this is it feels like you and Will talked off camera. I feel like
some of the best conversations we have. Basically, the way the show goes is we set up here. Bobby's a little groggier than I because he's on Central Time, and we get the show going. And then as soon as the show's done, we talk over the things a little bit, and then we bicker at each other for about 15 minutes about Donald Trump. And then we go off air, or we finish this. I start to edit. He starts to do his thing. And then we text each other angrily for about 40 minutes. That's our flow right now.
Sounds like me and my dad.
Yeah.
It works pretty good.
It's good. I mean, Bobby you came around a little bit last time. And basically my point is you can't defend everything that he does. Because I defend some of the stuff that Trump did. I think his decisive travel ban, I think there was nothing wrong with it. You can call that racist. I don't think that's racist. I think it's just, look, there's this thing happening in China and we're going to lock down travel. I think he's a deplorable human being, to use that Hillary Clinton's word. But at the same time, morality aside, sometimes you can't say anyone's making terrible decisions all the time because he's clearly not. But this was slow rolled for sure. But I think, like you said, with the NCAA, they didn't slow roll it. They moved quick.
Yeah, exactly.
Their credit.
Back to baseball, I think the NBA handled it correctly. And they
Absolutely.
certainly had the chance to have that go horribly wrong.
Yeah.
I think Adam Silver did a great job pulling that back together. We saw Rudy Gobert acting like an idiot and acknowledging he acted like an idiot and turning that around. I don't think he's going to end up the GOAT in the bad way. GOAT is a word in sports. It's completely turned around. But he's not going to end up a bad guy. All the people that got tested, the NBA turned that around as well, because it was like, well, how are they getting tests and nobody else is? Well, they're rich, and so they turned that around. The NFL is the interesting one to me, because they're the 800-pound gorilla of everything, and they've managed, by keeping their league season going, to kind of rule the sports world. I mean, there are only two things going on. There's besides Belarusian soccer, which is horrible and nobody should be betting on it.
Hey.
When's that cheese rolling?
You can bet on anything.
You throw the cheese thing down the hill. Is that still happening? Because that still needs to happen.
No, because that's England.
Oh, social distance rules don't apply there. Or we could do the Scottish thing where you have the pole and you chuck it. That can still.
I think we can go Scottish games.
I digress. All right, so back to football.
By keeping their league season going, Tom Brady was the biggest story. It was coronavirus Tom Brady on the theoretical paper. I think that was great. That was smart business. You can sign Tom Brady and still be reasonably socially distant and all that. They didn't have a ticker tape parade for him. It wasn't as big a deal. They didn't cover it the same way, but it still got the same note. I mean, even little free agents that were getting signed were big across the league. I think the draft is going to be bigger than ever, because for God's sakes, there's no other sports.
Yeah, for sure.
I sat there and watched an iRacing event the other day, and I'm a big esports advocate, and I'm disappointed that esports isn't having more of a moment, but iRacing actually is. And watching the shows, it looks really good. It sounds, they've got the regular announcers. On the NASCAR one, they had Jeff Gordon. So people were taking it seriously.
What is iRacing? I'm trying to Google this.
It's video game racing.
Oh.
It's a very technological, some of the sim setups are upwards of 6 figures. 3 screens, multiple computers. It's what they use to simulate things for the teams in testing. Formula Ones have, these giant ones on hydraulics that move in the turns. So that's a thing. What I'm curious about with the NFL is, because they've not only said that it's going to start with the draft and do everything normal, they're saying they're going to start their season on time. They haven't canceled minicamp yet, which is May. I can't believe that. I don't think there's any way we're going to get that going.
No, there can't be. That's crazy.
So they're going to have to figure that out, and they could end up the bad guy, because if they start canceling very late, that's going to be disappointing for people. I think they're going to have to figure out a way to, come up with something. Either you can delay football, you can do a 10-game season, and the world doesn't end, except for the TV money. Expand the playoffs, do a tournament. There's 100 different ways to do this, and it doesn't feel like they're taking it seriously because they've been lucky enough to say, "Hey, we've got 4 more months to figure this out."
Yeah.
Well, the NFL is a good. Go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
If you're just tuning in, we're here with Will Carroll. We're talking sports. Will's a sports writer, friend of ours, injury expert. So if you're just tuning in, we got a lot still to cover here today. We're going to cover some of his experiments as pitching coach with Indy. I'm excited to talk about openers. So, you use that with great success this year. We're currently talking about football, but Bobby, what do you got?
I was just going to jump in a little bit on the footballs. They've got armor on. They can pretty much do whatever they want. They rule the headlines. They rule, the off season takes the headlines over baseball season.
They do.
I mean, they've got the power. If the basically sending the guys out to bang their heads and get concussions and having no repercussions on the PR end, or if they did, they just brush them off. I mean, not canceling their mini camps, dropping the bucket for NFL.
See, I don't think it is. They are almost bulletproof, but I think they're going to have to be good citizens on this and figure this out. The other worry I have is that we're all baseball guys here. If baseball has to push back until, let's say, July, and they're going to try to extend the season, they've talked about the World Series at Christmas, which is ridiculous.
Yeah,
they're going to get buried. It's not just ratings. I don't think ratings matter as much as people let them on. But you're going to get just the mind share behind football will be horrible. Normally you get that summer gap where between the NBA playoffs and the start of football, that belongs to baseball. And that's been acknowledged. I have a friend that works for an MLS team, and he talks about how do we get in that gap? And that's where they have to kind of find some share if they're going to continue to grow in America. Baseball can't give that up, but they also can't jump in. So I think if they can't get going until July or worse, August, they should just cancel the season, which will cause all sorts of problems. But playing that late just isn't going to work. They'll have to go with something, a super short season, some sort of FA Cup. I don't know what they can do. They'll be in a very, very bad position.
Well, Will, do you think, there's been talk about shortening the season for a long time. They also are doing what I find really controversial and strange of adding more teams. Like, everyone makes the playoffs now, right? Like, obviously not everyone makes the playoffs, but there's more teams than ever that make the MLB playoffs, which to me, it's like, why do we play 162 games to really prove who's the best team over a really big sample size? But you can just like lose your season in a one game playoff because it's more exciting. I think that's BS personally.
Yeah.
But if this becomes the experiment where we have a 90 game season or a 60 game season and it's gangbusters and everyone's excited, like there's less baseball, so maybe each game's a little more special, kind of like when you get married, maybe you like see your wife every day, she's not quite as exciting. You see your husband every day, he's a little more annoying. But there's only so much baseball, so maybe we can have a little more fun with each game. Do you think that this could be that experiment for a shorter season afterward?
Yes. Simple answer, yes. Complex answer, no. Taking baseball down to anything short of 154 completely throws off the numbers.
That's
and the
true.
numbers
It's very true.
mean more in baseball than anything. If I say 56, everybody knows what I'm talking about. If I talk, 714, 406, there's also 20-game winner. You're not going to you barely have 20-game winners these days, but you wouldn't have a 20-game winner in a 100-game season. Numbers would mean different things. And shorter numbers would mean, a little more lucky means you're hitting 400. So plus, when you think about seasonal numbers, this is one of the things I looked at in the newsletter a couple of weeks ago. If you're, say, Albert Pujols, you're in the Hall of Fame, but do you get some of those really big, like 600 home run numbers? He's definitely on a downtrend here in his 40s. We'll have to see, how much longer can he play? I think he has 2 years left on his deal. He'll be about 50 by that time. And so it's one of those things where it's easier for him. He might lose some of those big numbers. If you're a guy like Mike Trout, here's the tough one for me. Mike Trout, as great as he is, as much as he's done, if he loses just a season, he goes from 40% to 20% to get to 500 because he doesn't put up those huge 50 home run seasons every year. He's a guy kind of like Hank Aaron.
He needs
that's
pace.
Not only going to have to be consistently at 40, he's going to have to do it for a longer period of time. And you wonder, players just don't seem to play that long anymore. They're making enough money that they can walk away. And I think Trout's going to be one of those guys. Trout's an interesting one. We were talking about this the other day, a bunch of guys. What do you know about Mike Trout? If I said, give me 5 facts about Mike Trout not related to baseball. Could you do it?
Well, I think that's the point, right? He keeps himself out of the spotlight. Is that the point you're making?
It's not just out of the spotlight. I think he's boring, and I don't say that as a negative. I just don't think he's a very interesting person. And that's okay. There's a lot of boring people in the world. You know, Bob at the office who sits in the cubicle down from you, you probably don't know anything about him because he's just a boring guy. But maybe Bob. He's really, really good at his job too. He's the best accountant ever. Mike Trout is one of the best baseball players we've ever seen. Yeah. But I think maybe he's not. Maybe he's just quiet. Maybe he's just shy. And all of those would be fine. I just think it's really intriguing that we know nothing about him. In an age where TMZ knows if you're dead before you do, it's really intriguing. We know almost nothing about a guy who's should be the biggest star in the game.
Well, how much of that is West Coast? Because he's got a guy across town. I mean, Clayton Kershaw is arguably in the conversation of greatest pitcher, at least of the last 40 years. Yeah. And you don't know anything about him either. You know, I don't know if I know more
about Clayton than I do about Mike.
But but still to your point, would they be bigger if Mike Trout played in Philadelphia, somewhere on the East Coast, Philadelphia, the Mets, Chicago, even? How big of a star is Mike Trout? How much should they parade him out as is he playing on prime time? Because who's watching West Coast baseball?
Yeah, that's a point, but I think you could take that a step further and say, Bryce Harper, as great as he is, and the opposite of boring, we don't know a lot about him. I mean, if I went to most people, the thing that surprised me is I don't think most people realize Bryce Harper is Mormon, which I think is a defining feature of him. It's certainly informed his boyhood and a lot of his choices now. And I think, religion isn't a big part of baseball, but if you talk about that contract, why did he put down such an emphasis on long rather than big dollars? Because he could have gotten more money in other places. He had bigger average annual value offers. But he wanted the longest offer because he wanted a stable family life, because he wants to have, a bucket load of kids. Okay. Him and Phillip Rivers can, have some tips there. But I think that was actually important to how we view his career, and not a lot of people know it. In Chicago, Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, two personality plus guys who, again, we don't know a lot about them. Baseball does a terrible job marketing, so I think that's part of it. But I think Mike Trout is the least interesting guy, but that doesn't have the Jeter effect. I think if we look back, Derek Jeter was the one that threw us off, because Derek Jeter might be the most boring human being known to man. I don't think he's ever said anything interesting. But yet there was that period there where he was dating a bunch of women.
There you go. Hollywood stars.
And, Dan, I know you and I have talked about your dating life before, and I'm not knocking here, but if we went back to 10 women, could we find none of them to even give us a fact, let alone, if you broke up with 10 Hollywood starlets, one of them is going to say something bad about you. What's in that gift basket besides an NDA that got him to go that long without any sort of negativity? That's the one that stuns me still to this day. I don't know how he got away with that.
Rumor has it is he's close with Will Smith, and they had one working prototype from the Men in Black movies of the memory eraser.
That's got to be it.
But you hear this. I mean, you hear that because everyone in baseball is connected by everyone's played with someone, and everyone has played with someone who's played with Derek Jeter. At least back when me and Bobby were still playing, there were guys who came in the minor leagues with them, and they all say the same thing, that Derek Jeter, he kept his personal life extremely personal. He was extremely smart about going out and doing things. He did often date like the most attractive woman in any town, like one of my friends played he was in the Yankee system, and he said, at Binghamton, that was their double A. No, that's the Binghamton Mets.
Trenton.
Maybe they were playing against them. I don't know, but I think it was Binghamton because there was this beautiful bartender at one of the places there in town, and like Derek dated her, but no one would ever know of it, and no one would ever talk ill of him because he seemed to treat people well. He ran with this crew of people that he had his handlers and like everything. If you're going to hang out with Derek, or if a woman was going to meet up with Derek, it was just like very under wraps. And I mean, it seems like he just did things the right way, and I don't know, but he kept things quiet in a really big city, and as the captain of the Yankees, which is an impossible task.
Yeah, I did an interview with, I'm trying to remember who it was, but it was a pitcher, and he had been with the Yankees, and I think was back with Columbus. I'm blanking on who it was, but he talked about when he first came up, the first person he saw was Derek Jeter, who walked him around, showed him where things were, introduced him to everybody from from Alex Rodriguez down to the clubbies, and he was like, that stuck with me. It was like, here's what time you show up, here's what time batting practice is, here's what time pitcher fielding practice is, and he was like, Derek Jeter knew everything, and you wouldn't think of that kind of guy being a tour guide, but yeah, he evidently did it every time there was somebody new showing up.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, especially today, and of course back then was, I think probably to every major leaguer's luck was just less technology, less texting, less the social media. Your world can be amplified way faster now than 5 years ago. So, but yeah, I mean, to your point, and I wanted to address my coughing earlier. So everyone out there who's watching, if you're hearing me cough, I've had a cough for over a month. So if I had coronavirus, I would have gone through it already, or maybe I have, but I actually have a lot of allergies, so I think I'm okay. But yeah, Will's backing away. I've been trying to project it through my webcam to you. But no, it's and which is an interesting side note. You can't cough in public, like you can't, and then you can't be like, no, I'm okay, like don't stone me. Which again, this is a crazy, scary thing that's happening. But like, I'm aware that I have to cough once in a while. And
do you think we'll go back to shaking hands?
Is he okay? That's a great point, and I don't know.
Do you want to go back?
I think it's an important gesture, personally.
Yeah, well, no. It's one of those things where I think we need something. At the end of the game, do we still shake hands with people? I don't know. I want some sort of gesture, but the actual act of shaking hands, I have no connection to it.
I'm not going to Eskimo kiss you, Will.
I mean, it's
way too close. We're not there.
Do we do a Jose Canseco, Mark McGuire forearm bash? Is that more acceptable? Do we do a virtual high five? I don't think we go back to shaking hands. I think that's going to be one of the things 20 years from now that people look back and go, wow, you did that? You were one of those handshakers?
Do you know what you touch with that? With your greasy palms? Yeah. So, Bobby, what do you think?
I don't think you go back to, I think maybe the one-on-one greeting Dan introduces us in person. I think that a handshake that probably sticks, is kind of just historically it's always stuck, but I can't see, like, I have a lot of youth teams. I can't see the 10-year-olds, slapping hands after the game and their parents not losing their minds.
Well, let's talk about that. Will, what's your opinion on the post-game hand slap, which is done after every game below pro baseball? How do you feel about that as an institution?
I'm not a fan. I'll be honest with you.
Thank you.
I actually don't go out and do it. The coaches would go out and I would just not. I didn't like it when I played and would always try to find an excuse not to. I just don't want to know the other team. I don't like when they talk before games. Even in college baseball, I'm sure you have this, Bobby, where kids have played on a different team with one of the players on the other team, and or they work out at the same sort of place. I personally don't want to like the other team. It is not a friendly competition for me, and that probably makes me a bad person. But I've never been a fan of it. Where I do like it is how the NHL does it, and how hockey in general does it. At the end of the series, somebody won, somebody lost, and you say good game, and you show some sportsmanship. I'm not saying don't shake hands and don't be friendly as bad sportsmanship. It's just, for me, I needed to not like the other team.
Yeah. Bob, where do you fall?
I'm with him. I don't want to have anything to do with the other team. I don't have friends on the other team when we're playing. If I want to talk to somebody I'm friends with, I'll talk to them when we get off the field. I don't need it feels more like the forced interaction for me is if they told me I didn't have to do it, I would probably do it with a few guys on the other team. But the fact that I have to, I don't want to.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, it's funny. So we have a mutual friend, Dave Harden. I met him for the first time, my first all-star year. And this is not a humble brag, but it was the first time I was in a clubhouse with guys that from other teams. And I'm the same as you, Will, where I'm on the dugout rail and I'm like, look at the way that guy has his pants. What a jerk. Like that guy, look at the way, like I hate the other team just like you do.
Mm-hmm.
And when I made that first team, this guy, Dave, who was one of the best pitchers in the league, who just has like a swagger about him. He's a confident, like you need that as a player.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that about him as a player. I'm like, I'm better than you. And so here I am in a clubhouse with him for the first time. And it's like, he's a nice guy. It's like,
Yeah.
I felt weird. I'm like, wait, these are all people just like my teammates. I could like these guys. And it was strange because it was the same as you. You just don't, some people aren't like that. And for me personally, I think the gesture is meaningless.
Yeah.
Handshake after the game, kids don't want to do it.
There's always one guy in the opposing dugout who's a little too chirpy, who's a little too loud.
Yeah, it's Bob.
And I was usually
Bob.
that guy.
It is me.
And you hate that guy, and then you realize, wait, I am that guy. And AJ Przinsky is the one that always comes to mind for me. As a catcher, he would just talk the whole game, and he was a jerk on and off the field. But when he was on your team, guys would hate him when they had to face him or hit with him behind the plate. But when he was on their team, oh yeah, he's great teammate, does everything right. So it's fine if he's our jerk. It's kind of like the way Giants fans looked at Barry Bonds. He was our jerk.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of times,
coffee refill, guys.
Yeah, no problem. Bobby, do you find as a college coach, do you find that, or a youth coach, do you find that the handshake is kind of driven by parents? Like they find it more valuable than maybe like baseball lifers do?
I don't find it. I don't find the handshake feels like the coaches force it. Like they know you're supposed to do it. It's like tradition. It's like something you always do. And until
there'd be an outcry if we got rid of it, right?
I don't know if there'd be an outcry. I think after the first team, I think after my 12U team decides like this other team's a bunch of a-holes, like we're not shaking their hands, then that team's going to have an issue with it, and all of a sudden it's going to be an issue. But
it's going to be that first one. Yep. I think if we just tried to say, you know what, my team doesn't shake hands, you'd take a hit. You'd have the parents on the other team. Oh, you're too good to shake hands. I think this whole Corona thing might say, okay, I don't have to do it now.
Oh, that'd be great. It'd be so great. Actually, one of my teams, the Woodward Senators, one of our coaches just made the decision himself. He's like, we're not going to shake hands. And we didn't have a problem with it because my team, his team, was getting pretty chirpy. The other team was getting pretty chirpy. And he's like, look, we're not going to do this and like make this an issue as we go through this line. And so then he kind of just like stopped for that tournament, kind of as like a policy. And so the other team would start walking out, and my coach would be like, nah, he would go out and like shake hands with the coaches only. And the other teams the parents were pissed. And it's like, look, and this was a guy who played 5, 6, 7 years in pro ball, and he's a really kind, like good human being. He wasn't doing it in any sort of malicious sense. He wasn't being a bad sport. He was just saying like, look, this is a meaningless gesture. I've done it my whole life. The other team's chirping at us. We're chirping at them. This is not a great situation. It could only be a worse thing. It's not like we're suddenly becoming buddies and like seeing them for the people that they are as we go through the handshake. Like, it's like, no, it's like, screw you. It's like just slapping hands, spitting on your hand. It's like, that's not good for anybody. That's not sportsmanship. And that's why I'm with all of you guys. That's just like, we should just do away with it, because it's just like, if it's meaningless, just get rid of it. I don't know.
There's a lot of baseball traditions I would love to get rid of.
All right, let's go into that. Give me another one. I love this topic. I love
just
this
the
topic.
way we do batting practice. This is why do we do batting practice the way we do batting practice? Because that's the way we've always done it. It all goes back to, for me, Paul DePodesta gave that famous talk to Goldman Sachs in 2000. I want to say 2001, might have been 2000, where he said, if we didn't always do it this way, how would we do it? And I think we have to ask that of everything. Why do we do this? Why do we throw bullpens the way we throw bullpens? Why do we warm up the way we warm up? We found, we've noticed, at Modus, one of the things that they found was that warm-ups were taking almost 50% of a pitcher's energy because of the way they were doing it. They would start off with the big weighted balls, and then you would throw really fast. They don't do it at game pace. So if you just do it at game pace, where there's 15, 20 seconds between pitches, it completely changes how you do it. And it's tough because you've done it this way forever. You have to get the catchers to kind of enforce the timing. And even then, the pitchers really throws them off. It's amazing how much things have changed. 10 years ago, plyo balls and connection drills just didn't exist. And now they're universal. So that, I think, shows that we can change. So I think we have to take a harder look at a lot of things around baseball. Let's start with a handshake, and then we'll change how we do batting practice groupings.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think pitchers need that hour and a half to gossip in the outfield. I mean,
yeah, clear.
We need that time to stand there idle and catch all the fly balls that Bobby can't hit out of the ballpark. Now, if you had more power, I could just stand there and not to collect everything that you hit. But you're a warning track power guy, so I'm gonna have to chase them all down. All right.
I would prefer that only the pitchers were out there shagging the balls, and after my round, I could just go sit down on the bench and watch you and ridicule you guys for being the non-athletes that you are. So I agree. There's changes that need to be made. Pitchers should be the only ones shagging, and that's just how it has to be. We're changing baseball right now.
Well, I know some teams have been doing it. I know Gabe Kapler, who got mixed reviews in Philadelphia. I think in part it sounds like because he pushed some of this stuff too hard. He pushed a lot of change on guys, really fast. But I know they were using, pitching machine and BP. So if you were to rethink it, how would it look to you?
Ideally, I would do what Toronto did and hire basically pitching imitators. Rather than having the coach throw it. Exactly. Get a guy, get some righties out there, get some lefties out there, give guys who can give different looks, different arm angles, but throw at game speeds and throw from the mound. Why are we throwing from close? Because Tommy Lasorda couldn't throw it that hard when he was in his 60s and 70s. If you look back at the game in the 60s and 70s, and it was a different game then, but they did throw batting practice from the front of the mound. And now we're 10 feet away, it seems like.
Yeah.
So I think it would look more like the game. The closer you can get to the specific activity you're doing, the better off it's going to be. If you're facing a lefty, you should be facing a lefty in batting practice. That's not always accessible, especially at lower levels. But I think we have to kind of take some lessons from it. I'm not sure a pitching machine is going to work because it's not going to be accessible for lower levels. And one of the things I always think about is what can you do at the major league level? What can you do at, a rural city? If you're in Podunk, Indiana, they probably don't have a big little league budget. And then I also think about what happens in the inner city, because we've got to think about making sure that the kids who live downtown and don't have a lot of green space can do the same things. You don't want baseball to turn into a rich suburban travel sport, which is really almost what it is at this stage.
Yeah.
So those kind of things. I think just getting as close as humanly possible to what you're wanting to do is going to be better. I honestly think there's ways to organize things so that the pitchers are throwing batting practice is better than what we have now.
Bobby.
I think he hit it on the head. Is getting it to as similar to the game as possible, and that's probably the biggest problem with baseball is how difficult it is to replicate somebody throwing hard from the same distance and being accurate with it. You know, I help out with a professional team up in Chicago, an independent team, and I throw a lot of the batting practice, and I will try and hum it in there and throw it harder from a decent distance, 45 feet. But I mean, at some point after 200 throws, it's like I'm fatiguing and I'm losing some accuracy. And at that point, if it takes me 15 pitches to get them 5 good swings, well, who's helping who at this point? They're just swinging to get out of the cage and make me look a little bit better. And I'm struggling to make it worth it. It's just the nature of the sport is so much different than, physically different than maybe warming up for basketball, where the manager can come out and basically give you a stand in front of you like a defensive player or stick his hands up. It's just so much different.
Mop handle.
You get you get the broom and you rub it in her face and see how if you can affect their shot. Whereas there's a guy that needs some actual physical tools to give you a better look. You can't just throw out there's a lot of coaches that can't throw batting practice.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys that can't do those things.
And this is where I watched the old Blade Runner the other day. I think this is a bona fide.
Which cut?
Huh?
Which cut?
I don't know, but it was the old one. There are multiple cuts. Am I missing?
Yeah. There's like 4 different cuts.
The Netflix cut, whatever that one is.
That's the director's cut, but it's not the final cut. So good, but not perfect.
Well, so I actually listened to the audiobook. Do Electric Sheep dream of, or have Android? Do Android Sheep have electric? What's the title? I can't remember.
Do Androids dream of electric sheep?
That's right. I really enjoyed that. There's a lot of deeper. I mean, every book is deeper than the movie, right? But that whole weird thread of like how important and how deeply everyone wanted to own an animal, just to sort of like feel connected to the world, and just like there's a lot of other stuff. I thought it was a really good read / listen. But replicants, I mean, engineered android labor to just throw, fuel. Come on. You get men, women, it'd be integrating baseball. I mean, that chick in Blade Runner that he had to kill, she could probably throw fuel. She was a specimen.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Just engineer them. It'd be great. It'd be great for everyone. So
you're watching director's cut Blade Runner, but you won't watch Tiger King.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm a sane person. Absolutely.
Will, you haven't seen it?
Yeah, I'm against Tiger King. I have a theory about why these shows are popular. It's because we all feel like we're really screwed up, and we want to see people more screwed up than us. And those people clearly are. We want to feel superior to them. And that's why reality TV is so big. That's why Teen Mom was so big. And my concern is always, I'm an animal guy. And the animals kind of get short shrift, and they're stuck in a cage. And there's a guy down in southern Indiana who was evidently a big part of this. Why do you have to own a tiger? Why? And evidently they don't cost that much, which kind of surprised me.
You could have taken the tigers out of this and just watched the people, and you would have loved it.
But if I took the tigers out of this and just made it, Redneck King, would you have felt as good about it?
Meth King.
Yes, I would have. Yeah. Yes, I would have. It was very entertaining. It was at this juncture of life where the 4 walls are starting to cave in, quite entertaining.
See, I'm so prepared for this because I've been working from home for 20 years now. Welcome to my world. This is what I do. I think all sports writers are doing okay with this, except missing going to the park.
Well, we'll elaborate on that. So for people who this whole thing is new and they might be going insane, can you offer any advice as a lifetime work from homer?
Yeah. First, you don't have to get into a routine, but make sure that there's a difference between work and home. That's the toughest part for a lot of people, is if you're just doing all your work from the office, going out to a different room. This is my office in my house. You've been over to the house, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is kind of an enclosed space. It's not, particularly inviting. I got my coffee behind me. I've got my computer here. Everything I need to work, booze is over there. So everything I need to work is here. But when I leave this room and go out to watch TV or sit on the patio or do anything, that's apart from work. There's office and there's home, and differentiating those is really difficult. I think especially for a sports writer, you're not working a 9 to 5. You can't just shut it off, but you have to be able to differentiate work and home. And I think that's difficult for a lot of people. You've got to exercise. You've got to be able to be a little bit physical, whether that's just getting out for a walk and maintaining your social distance, or I think we're going to head to masks here pretty quick. It'll be interesting to see. What's that?
Yeah, that sounds great, except I can't, where are you going to buy a mask? I can't buy literally anything to clean anything.
The problem is
sounds nice. I'd like to go to hand sanitizer
for most of them. I actually have some. I was a little bit ahead of the curve and said, this is coming. So I bought one actually from Training Mask. I have a friend that works there and was able to get a couple. So they actually have some, but they're not cheap. Endorsement for them. But I think the biggest thing you have to do is get that defined space if you possibly can. It's as simple as sometimes putting on work clothes, shower in the morning. Don't just work in your slobby sweats that you would wear around the house to watch Tiger King. Actually kind of find a way to delineate work and life is my biggest one.
Okay. I think that's good advice. Bob, have you found anything that's helping you get through this mentally?
Absolutely not.
No, Bob's
I'm just sitting here
out.
Yeah, I'm active. I mean, you're probably the same way. Like you get up and you go to WeWork or you go work at a coffee shop or something like.
Not anymore.
No,
God, no. I'm not. You think I'd go to? I'm a big coffee shop guy. That's where I did all my work for all these years. Loved it. I just like being around people, even though I don't want to talk to them. And I have a WeWork membership, and I love it. And I was going to one location all up until this week because the mayor here shut it down, so I'm not going against it. But the WeWork location I went to, I was literally one or two people on like a 40,000, 50,000 foot floor. So it's like I'm working in an empty gymnasium. There's no risk in that. I wouldn't go to another.
WeWork is going to be the next Tiger King. I'm convinced of it.
They're going to go under. They have to go under. Especially with the news today or recently with Adam Newman's shares not being bought back. There's
story behind that. Haven't they already started casting that? That one is going to be who plays Newman? Newman's wife.
They need it. You know who? Well, in size wise, I immediately think of Egon from Ghostbusters. But what's his name? I'm drawing a blank. I just listened to a Joe Rogan podcast with Dan Aykroyd, so I've been in like a Ghostbusters mode. But yeah, that's a crazy story. But anyway, I'm not really getting out anymore. So
no, but the whole you're similar to myself. Like if I'm up and I need something to do or I need to do something,
you just don't want to be at home.
I'm just not going to be at home. I'm going to go do it at a coffee shop, or I'm going to go do it at my facility or wherever. I'm going to be out of the house. Like I'm up and out of the house for more than I'm in the house most days. So that to be here all the time and it's just like my wife works from home and she's having that same issue Will's talking about where you don't have
she used to be around you now, which is probably tough for her.
We're really testing the limits of marriage, I tell you what. But she doesn't have a designated where we don't have an office we live in a 2-bedroom condo. Like I'm in the spare bedroom right now. We have a desk kind of in the living area, the living room, but she, everything's basically mushed together for her. So it's getting difficult.
Even something as simple as a chair. When I'm in this chair, I'm at work. When I'm not, and then just push that chair away. Or here is my work outfit. Here's a work hat. I've seen some people that do that. When the work hat is on, it's one thing. And it was Carroll Grimace. I had to look it up.
Yeah.
Remember when we used to just have to think about things and wonder and miss it, and now we've got the whole internet in our pocket.
Yeah, Alexa, who is it? I could have yelled at her. She's listening to this. I'm going to get advertisement for Ghostbusters after this.
No doubt.
Ghostbusters T-shirts are going to flow through my
phone. The Ghostbusters sequel is delayed a year. We're going to have this giant entertainment hole. Somebody had a good line saying with all the movies being delayed, all the way out in October and November, Bad Boys for Life is the leading Oscar contender right now.
Well, Will, how did you feel about the new Blade Runner remake? Because they have a sequel coming out in another year. How did you like the remake?
A sequel to another Blade Runner sequel?
I'm pretty sure there's another Blade Runner coming. Yeah.
I thought Denis Villeneuve did a great job. I was really hesitant that it wasn't most of the originals, and certainly wasn't Ridley Scott again, which worried me, especially since he's alive. I really enjoyed it. I thought they did well. I thought the casting was good. I thought the way they handled things was great. Basically, it was really, really good. I mean, Villeneuve did Arrival, which is phenomenal, and he's doing Dune, which I don't think is doable, but he did really well with 2049. So
yeah, I liked it a lot.
See where it goes.
And it was a unique movie. Bob, did you see it?
I did not.
It was unique. Did you see it in the theaters, Will?
Yeah, I actually saw it in IMAX.
Yeah, I did too.
It's gotten to the point where if it takes a fairly big movie to get me to go, because the home experience for me is so much better. I've got a surround sound set up. I got a big screen. It's 4K. There's nobody, throwing popcorn at me. I don't have to pay $12 for a soda. You really got to get out to a movie to have that experience. I just don't enjoy the movie experience unless it's a movie. Blade Runner was one. Ford versus Ferrari was one that I knew I had to go see at the IMAX. If I don't go to the IMAX, I'm probably not watching it, or not watching it until I get home. Yeah,
and the Blade Runner was really unique because they didn't really have what you'd call like a soundtrack. They just had lots of like, it was just like wham as he's like driving in his spaceship, and then it was just very sort of loud, noisy kind of soundtrack, which was being in the theater, like you could feel like the bass of just the sort of like ambient, like tonal kind of music that they had in Blade Runner 2049. So I thought that was like being immersed in the sounds of the movie was really important to the overall movie experience. And when I left the theater, I was kind of like, I don't feel like this would be nearly as sort of impactful watching this at home. So, but yeah, I thought it was well done.
You need a better surround sound setup
to the sequence. So, well, I'm here in DC in a studio apartment right now. So we're gonna get there. Everything is surround sound when you're in a studio, Will.
I'm looking forward to the drive-in coming back. Social distancing.
You're right.
Stay in your car. Don't look at me. Don't notice the bottle of alcohol.
Food delivery. Yeah.
I think, you're onto something here. I know a lot of people talk about this with the social distancing, but yeah, I've got a pretty good surround sound setup. It's not, world class or anything, but my car has a really good sound system, and you know where you're sitting, so you don't have to deal with a room correction or anything else. It doesn't get all echoey. If you could figure out how to use my car's sound system for a drive-in, I would be in. If we go back to that, speaker that you hook on your window, that was, wasn't even as a kid, I remember going to one, and it was basically like going to a silent movie. You couldn't hear the dialogue, and it was probably like Star Wars that I was seeing for the 20th time or something.
When's the last time you went to a drive-in, Will? Because I think they have that. I'm pretty sure when I went to one as a kid, we did that. We tuned into like an AM radio station, and it's been through our car.
Yeah, I would have been a kid, so it's the early 1930s.
Yeah, they have that technology, so stay tuned. As long as they're not, I mean, there's like none left.
It was probably AM, kind of like the same thing you did with Mr. Microphone, if you remember that.
Yeah. There's a lot of technology has changed. So Will, you worked for Modus for a while. Mm-hmm. The company was sold. What are some of the things you took away from your time? And one thing I want to really talk about is you guys used an opener at U Indy this year, And I think that was in part by, I mean, a lot of sensible data, and not just the Modus arm sleeve stuff, but also the fact that getting through when a pitcher faces the lineup for the third time, especially the fourth time, their OPS goes up a ton, WOBA goes up a ton. So you basically don't want your pitchers to face a lineup a third time if you can help it.
Yeah.
Definitely not a fourth time unless they're dominating. So talk a little bit about your opener experience.
Yeah, the opener experience was mixed. We were successful. It was less successful, but I think we were figuring it out. In a way, the opener wasn't to get any sort of lineup advantage, and I don't think coaches reacted to it. We had two lefties.
Can you back up and explain what you mean by opener for those who don't know?
Yeah, we used a pitcher to essentially pitch the first inning only. And then the so-called starter would come in the second inning. So it changed the warm-ups a little bit. The tough part for us is that we didn't have the greatest success with that first inning. And we also had some resistance to not having the ball. Pitcher would come in and be down 2-0 and complain about it. And even the position players were a little bit perturbed by it. We adjusted. I think it was starting to work. What we really saw success in was that it was getting our guys deeper into the game without fatiguing them. I don't think we ever went over 110 pitches. And that was one where we got a little bit greedy and he got knocked around in that last inning. He was pitching so well, though. Michael Whitty, he's going to be great. If we'd finished this season, he would have been drafted. Little lefty, just has great stuff, gets up to about 90. If he was 2 inches taller, he'd be a top 10 round pick. So what the opener does is gets that guy deeper into the game. I thought it was going to change lineups, and it really didn't. One of the things I did was I created a model in Amazon Web Services that basically ran the game 10,000 times and tried to figure out how to model out exactly which pitcher would be best for which situation. And the rule was you could never get above a 1.2 workload, which I'll have to explain ACR. ACR is a workload between your acute, which is 9 days, and your chronic, which is 28 days. And you want those ratios in balance. The easiest way to think about it is you don't train for a marathon by running 26 miles. You build up to it. You get the capability of it. And you often hear elite runners talking about how they could have run another 10 miles. They probably could have, even the paces they run, because they've built that kind of stamina in order to maximize for that activity. You want to do the same thing for baseball. So one of the things that we didn't get to do that I think was going to be a more valuable part of it was we were going to limit the workload of the starter by taking an inning away, putting our best pitcher out there for 5 or 6 innings, and then closing out. You can find, we had 30 pitchers, so it was going to be fairly easy for us to find bullpen arms that were pretty solid. But in the midweek games, we were going to use what would normally be bullpen time and use one of our weekend guys for 2 to 3 innings. And by the end of the season, they were going to have about 12 more appearances than they were used to, with only about 6 more innings than they were used to going if they were 7, 8 inning normal starters. I think that's where we were really going to see a big jump, and unfortunately we never got to that part of the season where we had midweek games. So
with acute to chronic ratio, so that's kind of like over a 28-day span. If you threw 100 pitches every day, that would be sort of like your number. And then in a 9-day span, if you'd want to throw no more than 120 pitches over that span, that would be 1.2 times your normal workload. Am I interpreting that correctly? So
you're exactly right.
Okay, so if you're at home, it can definitely be a confusing thing at times but overall it makes a ton of sense. And just like you said with the running analogy, whatever you're used to doing, you can go about 20% above it, and we don't really want you to spike any higher than that, because then what essentially happens? Well, I mean, not only do you have a bigger spike in fatigue that day, like you went a lot longer than you're used to, but then also your body has to then recover from that because you're more depleted than normal.
Exactly. And that part hasn't been studied. And that's the part that's really intriguing to me. To me, recovery is the part of pitching that we haven't maximized yet. And there's a lot of theories that we can test. One study was done by Samir Mehta, now with the Orlando Magic. He was with, I want to say it was St. John's in Washington, D.C., baseball program there that won multiple state titles.
Very good program.
Yep. Again this year. They've tracked every pitch for 3 years, and the injury risk was 26 times greater if you were above a 1.2 workload. I think they may have used 1.3 as the number. I forget exactly where it was, but again, it was Dr. Samir Mehta who did the study. It's available out there. I think it's still on the Moda site. Absolutely well-constructed study. I don't think there's any question. There's a lot of controversy around ACR in the academic community, but like you said, Dan, I think it's something that just makes good. Yeah, there's some things when somebody tells you, some crazy academic idea, you go, does this work? That one, I think we all get it because it's common sense at some level. You start putting the numbers and the things to it. But I do think that there's definitely something to it, whether you're technologically measuring it or even just rough measuring it and trying to keep workloads down, which I think we've got to figure out how to do that at the lower levels. We're seeing far too many youth arm injuries.
Yeah, and I kind of had the same sentiment when I heard about the acute to chronic ratio because, on the Moda site, they were talking about, hey, this is from research we've done. I'm like, well, where's the research? Like, I haven't really seen it. Like, I haven't heard much about it, like who did it. And there wasn't a lot of info on that. And that's like, okay. But then, like you said, it sort of passes the common sense test where it's like, if we're trying to track and have our pitchers do anything, yeah, we want them to throw a consistent amount of pitches over a long period of time and not have huge spikes or less rest than normal. So, yeah, I think I don't think there's probably any downside to doing that. I think probably I'm sure in the same boat that is the 1.2 the exact number? Is it 1.1? Is it 1.35? Like, what is that true exact number? Is it, and that could maybe be up for discussion down the road, but.
Yeah, the only thing I think is questionable at this stage is whether or not that number is individualized.
Yeah.
And I do think there's some variation in there, but I actually think some arms are able to train up more. I did an article in 2005 at Baseball Prospectus talking about how do we explain why some pitchers can go out there and throw all day. The one I always get is, how could Nolan Ryan throw 270 pitches the way he did?
He was a replicant.
Kids today can't do it. What's that?
He was a replicant, I think.
No, he wasn't. He was very normal, and he had a damaged elbow for most of his career. In 1986, Jim Andrews told him he needed Tommy John surgery, and he said, no, it's too experimental. It hadn't been, get this, okay, Tommy John surgery was done in 1974 on, oddly enough, Tommy John. In 1986, they hadn't had 10 operations yet.
That's crazy.
Yeah, the second one, and this is a great trivia question for everybody, the second Tommy John surgery in baseball, the third overall, was done in 1978. So it went 4 years, and Tommy John was back and successful. Are you telling me there wasn't a guy out there who didn't damage their arm? The great answer to this one is Houston Astros pitching coach Brett Strom was the second Tommy John.
Yeah.
And Frank Jobe, who unfortunately has passed, used to say, if I had just thought of this 10 years earlier, we'd call it Sandy Koufax surgery.
Yeah, I've heard that one. That's it really is crazy. And plus when I don't know, Tommy John's recovery was a lot different than it looks today. Like he was how long was he in a cast? Wasn't it
6 weeks?
6 weeks? That's a long time.
Yeah, and he had a major complication. He had ulnar nerve compression, so they had to go in and do a transposition, which some surgeons do automatically today. If you ever get two orthopedic surgeons in the same room, just do you transpose or not, and walk away for an hour. They'll still be talking about it. So yeah, his was 18 months, recovery, not because he needed 18 months, but because he had a fairly major setback about 3 months into it. And he had 2 surgeries, which is not something we see happen too often. The rehab was done terribly. It was, oddly enough, the rehab was essentially done not by one of the athletic trainers or anybody at Carroll and Job. It was done by Mike Marshall, who was more or less experimenting on poor Tommy. So it's fairly interesting to go back at it. And yet we still use that 18-month timeline as one of the baselines for no good reason. Tommy John guys can come back much, much faster than they do.
Well, and so I saw you tweeting about that recently. Tell me a little bit more about that, because you basically said we don't know how fast guys could come back. Yeah. And we kind of have to be willing to crack some eggs to figure that out, because if we're going to push it, more guys are going to fail their rehab.
Yeah, we've had a number of guys that have come back under a year. Actually, the record is Ken Daly, who was in the 80s, came back almost in season. He had it at the end of, I want to say, the 86 season, and was back in 87 pitching very, very well. I would love to track him down. I've been trying to. He came back in 7 months. And we've seen pitchers recently come back in 9 and 10, but you do see more failures. There's not a great record of youth numbers, but we've had guys coming back much, much quicker, largely because you'll get a guy who's a high school senior, and if he doesn't pitch in March, he's not going to pitch.
Yeah,
it's just not going to happen. So you see guys that'll push to come back, and they're maybe they're out a month. We've seen 8 months, 9 months. With internal brace, we've seen some ridiculous numbers I'm not allowed to share here, but much, much lower. Talking weeks, not months.
And how are you defining come back? Because I feel like that's a really important term. And
pitch at the same level.
Okay. So
success. I don't sit there and say, same ERA or anything, but if you're a major league pitcher, you're now back pitching in major league games. And that's another thing that throws off the timing. If you're ready to pitch in January, doesn't matter, no games in January.
Yeah.
We don't count it until April, even if you're pitching in spring training. If you take a look back at Matt Harvey, who was held out, he could have pitched, in August or September, but he didn't pitch until the next April, because it was a decision between the team and his agent. And yet people are saying, well, he came back in 18 months. No, he came back in 12, but you chose another 6 months, and now you're going to call that the normal timing. It's a little bit nuts. So guys could come back a little bit further. Again, you would be risking a higher failure rate, and that's the thing about Tommy John surgery. It's Achilles heel. It's really, really successful. You're talking about, the real rate is something like, I want to say 76% was the last one I saw. And most of those are not surgical failures. But the vast majority is a high school kid who decides, I don't want to do a year of rehab. So he just doesn't come back. Or you'll see the same thing. Guys will realize, I wasn't going to make it anyway, so I'm not going to go back and ride the buses in low A. And they walk away.
Well, and do you remember the number? Because, go Bob.
No, I'm just taking it all in.
Well, Will and we could go on about this forever, but one of the things in the ASMI injuries in baseball course that they talked about, which is really interesting and a lot of people don't think about, is the statistical return to form, which, like you said, if you're a big leaguer, like say you're an established big leaguer, you're probably going to get a chance back in the big leagues. So you're going to get a chance to suck, right? Or succeed. And a lot of those guys, however, come back and they suck and they fade off, and you never realize that they just didn't come back, essentially. So when they start talking about, success rate as returning to the previous level, well, if it's high school, your high school team's probably going to let you come back and throw a pitch. If it's college, you're going to be probably let back and throw a pitch unless you just really have essentially failed to return to form. So those are almost guaranteed. As long as you wait out the timeline, which you said it could be off, you'll get a chance. Now in minor league ball or independent ball, much more up to will someone sign you? That was my case with my second Tommy John. Is someone going to sign me again and let me be on the field? And then the other thing is, and I don't know if you remember the statistic because I don't, but I think it's somewhere like 40% of guys actually return to the same level of statistical ERA consistency they have. So if you're a 4.0 pitcher in the big leagues before Tommy John, do you come back and you're a 4.0 or better pitcher when you return? Do you remember the number of that?
I don't.
It's low. It's much lower though.
That, which would surprise me a little bit, unless you're talking about a very large sample size. At the major league level, pitchers basically come back. At this point with Tommy John surgery, no matter which surgeon, no matter which technique, we're seeing guys come back. They don't come back better. They don't throw harder. All those myths still aren't true, but they do come back as they were.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had a long debate with a major league GM about what if we had a guy who didn't have an elbow problem and we just put him on a Tommy John rehab. Take a guy who probably wasn't going to make it and just sit him out for a year and have him not pitching, but working out, doing all the drills, doing all the things you need to do. And would he come back differently? And nobody's done it yet, but I think there might be something there to completely retooling a guy. We did see a team, the Rangers, who took their draftees and deloaded them and basically said, after your high school season, after your college season, you're just not going to throw, and we're going to bring you back the next year. Problem is, the three main guys they had, two of the three ended up with fairly major arm injuries. And was that the cause? Don't know. But certainly that was a variable they didn't like seeing the results from. So they're not doing it again, as far as I'm aware. We'll have to see.
So with that variable of time off, I know more and more people are saying, hey, maybe it's not a great thing to do to like not throw a ball for 3 or 4 months in a row and then start again. Where do you fall on that issue?
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you. For years, especially Jim Andrews and Glenn Fleisig and the guys at ASMI were saying you have to take some time off. I think Jim would regularly say take 3 months off. Mm-hmm. And again, we have to remember what off is. If you went and played football in the fall, you're probably not going out and long tossing after football practice. If you're playing basketball or wrestling or doing whatever sport you want to do in the winter, that's what rest used to be. Is everybody was a multi-sport athlete, and not the case these days. It turns out no. You might be onto something to throw year-round in a controlled fashion. If you're not overworking yourself, ramping down and then ramping back up is pretty difficult. I'm certainly no athlete, but I did a lot of tracking my data on my Peloton, and I had a small injury. I had a strained hamstring, had to take a couple of weeks off. Just a couple of weeks absolutely changed my data. You get back on, you're not from zero, but man, you're at a much lower point. And I could actually show you the graphs on data. My power, my stamina, everything was down. And it didn't take 2 weeks to get back. It took like 8. So you've got to figure that out. ACR works for everything. It's kind of amazing in that way. But the stuff you have to look at is making sure if you're going to ramp down, you have to ramp up, and it takes a long time. Which to bring it full circle, what's going to happen when Major League Baseball comes back? I heard one hitter, I can't remember who it was, saying, "I don't need a big spring training. Give me 10 at bats and I'm ready to go." Well, yeah, you are, but the pitchers aren't. I'm sure you want 10 at bats because the pitchers would be trash.
Yeah. Well, the hitters say that, but they always struggle to hit velocity in spring training. I mean, pitchers always we feel real good about ourselves in spring training because, like, man, that's just blowing by that dude. It's like 91. You're like, false sense of security. But no, you're right. So what would you suggest Major League Baseball do if you were the commissioner and you could control what every pitcher did? What would you have them do?
It's a tough question. The question really isn't what I would do with spring training. It's what are they doing now? Are these guys actually being able to get enough work to keep their workload up? They've obviously ramped down some. What are we seeing from these guys? Garrett Cole throwing with his wife. It's not exactly a normal workout. So if they've been able to keep the ratios up, then they don't have to have as long a time. I think you have to go a month. And then the teams are going to have to get really, really smart about ramping those guys up in a shortened period of time, but second, not extending them. I think we're going to see the ramp up carry into the season. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say we need an 8. If you wanted to be super safe, you would say everybody starts back at 0 and you ramp them up in 8 to 10 weeks. I don't think that's feasible. So what I think we're going to need to see is, 2-3 starts for pitchers, where they're going 3, 4, 5 innings, and then not have them go 6 and 7 until they've built up those first couple starts. Alternatively, here's a great chance to experiment. Get a tandem going. Figure out how to do a modified 4-man. Use an opener. Figure out how to, talk to one assistant GM the other day, said, we don't think we can do a lot. So we're discussing a Johnny Holstaff. And I think that it would be effective. So a team that gets creative and smart with it might have a real advantage this year being forced into it.
Well, Bob, and you can speak. I think one of the problems, and I think this is from all reports, this is a broken system in Major League Baseball, is that spring training, they act like a lot of the time, we're going to slowly ramp you up for the season. That's not at all true if you're a pitcher in the minor leagues or if you're trying to make the big league team. There's you got to be ready on day one to throw your absolute best or get sent back down or get cut. Bob, can you speak on that sort of culture? I mean,
I'm with you that, I treated spring training as like day one, you have to be ready. You have to be ready to go. You don't get the luxury, especially as, like you said, a minor league guy, you don't get the luxury of, the first, week and a half, we're going to go out to 100 feet, 120 feet. It's like, I'm showing up to spring training day one, and if I need to throw it over the center field wall, like, give me the ball. And, this is obviously different because who knows what anybody's able to do currently in their current situation. Garrett Cole's playing catch with his wife. Some of these guys are locked in the house. They have nobody to play catch. They have no way of training other than, maybe some workouts, in-home workouts. But for a normal spring training, for as long as it is, I would expect some of these guys to, at least if I was the GM or if I was an organization, unless you're Garrett Cole, where I can treat, you can treat spring training as your ramp up, you got to come in ready to go. I mean, as a player myself, I never stop throwing in the off season. Granted, I'm a position guy, so I don't put necessarily the stress of a bullpen or the torque on my elbow or, all the different factors that a pitcher might have, which causes more injury, Tommy John injuries in pitchers and position guys. But I never stopped throwing. I mean, even if I ramp down and I'm going 2-3 days a week, I mean, if I need to get up to every day, it's going to take me 10 days to 2 weeks. Whereas now you basically have to treat everybody like they have been stagnant for essentially 2 months, probably maybe longer, 8 weeks, 10 weeks,
which is hard because, and that's I think the problem with spring training is, even if you wanted to give guys like, he needs to ramp up, you still have to evaluate based on what you see. You can't just guess, be like, Dan didn't get to throw as much. Bobby threw a ton. Well, Bobby looks really good. Dan doesn't look as good, but I'm going to keep Dan because I just believe in him. Like when he's full speed, it's like, no, that's why all these guys that need to make a team, they have to show up ready to throw 100% of their velocity. Like if you throw 95 and you show up throwing 92, they're like, are you hurt? What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like, are you declining? Oh, maybe you're not as good as you were. And then you're just, see ya. So
how are you evaluating? How's an organization going to, these are first world problems when you're talking about who's going to make the big league team. I mean, you got your 30 guys and 26 of them are going to make it essentially. There's not your 40-man roster pool is not essentially the guys that have a chance to actually make the big league team for most organizations. But, you don't need to evaluate Garrett Cole based on day one, but you're going to need to evaluate the 25th guy on the roster day one. Like that guy needs to come in with a different mindset. And what do you, how do you separate that? You got, I guess it's more self-awareness, understanding where you fall in the pecking order. But
I think that's going to be interesting, especially for guys that were injured. Dylan Betances comes to mind, coming off the Achilles. What's he going to have to do to show that he's ready to go? And how much has he been able to rehab? The answer is quite a bit, I'm guessing. But with a lot of these guys, you're right. It's the lower level guys that are going to struggle more. A guy who might have been able to crack the team in a normal spring training is going to have to go to AAA and do it again. It's going to be, especially, that when we add in the service time questions, which are going to be a complete mess this year, their guys are going to get hosed. Depending on when the season starts, a guy, trying to think of a Gavin Lux. Yeah, that guy's not, he should be a rookie of the year candidate. And because of the service time questions, if he even comes up this year, I'll be stunned, because it makes sense for the Dodgers to screw him out of that year.
No doubt, especially someone like him, where you feel like he's been rumored in trades and the Dodgers have been adamant, we are not trading this kid.
Yeah.
But then if you get a 60-game season, am I going to waste a year on? Is he going to help me that much more than their backup? I don't even know who's still the best, Enrique or Hernandez or
Kiki Hernandez.
Yeah, Kiki Hernandez and Chase Utley, if he pulls himself out of retirement again for 60 games for the sprint instead of the marathon. You probably just take one of those guys at a replacement level and hope you catch lightning in a bottle with one of them. And
that's an interesting one. You mentioned Utley. I haven't heard anything about him and haven't even thought about him until you mentioned him. But are there guys who were thinking of hanging it up and say, you know what, I can probably do 60 games? And if you're a Chase Utley, I don't think he has Hall of Fame numbers, but if you can add to your case or go after a World Series ring, you might see a couple guys hang up, especially pitchers. If you're a guy at the end of your career like Adam Wainwright, are you willing to swallow a bottle of Advil every night at bed to come back and throw one more year and have a chance? And let's admit it, in a shortened season, more teams are going to have a chance.
Oh yeah, yes, and the answer is yes. He's willing to do that.
And I wanted to hold back real quick because I know Will's got to go in a minute, and we're really appreciative of your time today. What for coaches who might be out there, because I think what you guys did at Indy was awesome. I mean, you really, I think, explored a lot of the technology, and it seemed like, obviously you guys were killing it with the opener, because you and I briefly talked yesterday about this. What were some of the challenges? Because you said there were some mental challenges that are a little bit unseen with using an opener. What were some of those that coaches should be aware of if they try it?
It's tough because it's such a short burst. If you give up a run, it's kind of deflating, just like getting behind. There's a mental challenge. One of our pitchers that was working as the opener tried to figure out how to best warm up. Do I warm up as a starter? Do I warm up as a reliever? And he never really found what worked best for him. For the starters coming in the second inning, they had to alter their routine and try to time it out in a way that they didn't. Plus, we were going to ask them to relieve in the middle of the week, which is something they weren't used to. So that's a change. The bigger one is you've got to get them on board. When I was playing, my college coach would just tell us, do this, and fully expect us to do this. And if he didn't, he'd just cut us. It was not a democracy. And with the way the game is today with the kids and the parents, you pretty much got to get everybody on board. And our coach already did a great job with that. With me, I just wanted to tell them what to do. I do not like telling pitchers what to do. I like telling pitchers what they need to do. I need you to go out there and get outs. One of the biggest struggles I had with kids was they all want to strike everybody out. They want to strike every single pitcher or every single batter out. And I'm like, no. I was trying to find a way that the NCAA wouldn't ban me, but give them something for the fewest pitches in an inning. If somebody could have gotten away with a 3-pitch inning, I would have bought a mistake dinner. I wouldn't actually, because that's illegal. But
and then they lose their eligibility.
Yeah. So there was something. I was going to make a T-shirt because you can actually do that. Something. These kids, I think we're teaching pitchers to be scared of bats. They don't trust the defense behind them. They see contact as failure. The strikeout, as Kevin Costner famously said, it's communist.
Mm-hmm.
Ground balls are democratic. Let's have some more ground balls. I think we've really got to, especially in an era where the hitters are trying to launch the ball. I'm not anti-launch angle here, but if the thing, I can remember when batting average on balls in play, the research first came out in the early 2000s. I was like, this is crap. This is crap. There's no way this is right. And it's definitely right. But I was not a good pitcher, but I could make guys roll in double plays.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can make you hit a ground ball at my shortstop. I can do that. That is a skill I have. So if I can do it, of course, Greg Maddux can do it. But turns out, no, not really. It was something I felt I could do. But if you look back in a larger sample, no, it was just, I remember the times I got the guy to actually do what I did, not the time he took me to the fence.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the bigger changes. The mental challenge of it is going to be how to deal with something that's unusual. And again, this again goes full circle. Getting baseball to change is tough.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, Will, we really appreciate your time today. So for all of you out there listening, you should definitely keep in touch with Will. So number one, you should follow him on Twitter. He tweets out tons of really, really good information, not just for baseball fans, but for sports fans in general. So if you need a really good source of really just someone to follow in the sports industry that's going to give you good injury advice, good baseball advice, good just sports, poignant, timely, interesting sports advice, definitely follow him. He's at Injury Expert on Twitter. And then I also highly recommend you subscribe to his newsletter. I do. It's undertheknife.substack.com, and I'll put links in the show description. But Will, do you want to talk briefly about your newsletter?
Yeah, this is what I did for years at ESPN and Sports Illustrated and Baseball Prospectus. It's just write about injuries and explain to you what they are, what to expect from them, how it's going to affect your fantasy team, how it's going to affect the bets you're going to lay the next day, how to get an advantage and to understand them. I've been doing that for 20 years, and it's exciting to get back to it. It's free until opening day, whenever that may be. So you can sign up for free, get those. It's not all going to be subscription. There's going to be at least once a week where there's a free kind of recap of what happened. So even if you're not going to pay for it, I think there's going to be some value.
Yeah, so you can definitely sign up now, start getting his newsletters for free. And then, when he switches to the pay model, $5 a month, that's a no-brainer when you think of all the stuff that could, make you a lot more money in fantasy sports or in your betting. It's just a good investment. So if you're someone like me who follows MLB trade rumors or some of these other little sort of micro blogging platforms to stay up to date with good information, Will's the same way, but it's much more in depth, right to your inbox. Will's an awesome writer. So it's something you should definitely sign up for. So again, we'll put the links in the show notes and here on Twitter and YouTube. So you can easily do that. But again, it's undertheknife.substack.com. So Will, thanks again. It's great to see you. It's been a while, but appreciate you coming on the show.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate the time.
It was great, Will. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care, Will. So thank you for being here. We appreciate you tuning in at 9 a.m. here every Monday, Wednesday, Friday on YouTube and Twitter. And if you are new to the show, we do this every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, again, 9 a.m. Eastern. We are going to have some noontime shows coming up soon. So Bob, we have a West Coast guest on Monday.
It's good for me. I get to wake up a little later.
You get to sleep in. So we'll be here at 12 p.m. Eastern time on Monday. And if you're not on my newsletter list, definitely sign up. You can do that also in the show notes or go to danplut.com. And I send out just an alert where I'm letting you know who's coming on the show and when. Just give you a quick reminder. Obviously, we'll be streaming here on Twitter and YouTube consistently, so you can check replays immediately afterwards. So if you're just tuning in and you want to catch the beginning of the show, you can do that here on Twitter, Periscope, and YouTube. Periscope, if you're not aware, Periscope's confusing. It's like Twitter's sister app where you can do live streaming. So that's what we use here on Twitter. And then obviously we're on Spotify, iTunes, all your podcast platforms. So if you want to catch all the episodes, this will be up here later this afternoon here on Friday. So, and you can replay all the other ones. Bob, take us out, my man.
Dan, it's been fun. Thanks to Will again.